Hey, I'm Tobi and welcome back to my YouTube channel where I talk mainly about bookish related things. And in today's video I'm going to be giving you some autumn, fall book recommendations. So I'm going to split it into three different categories. So we've got the more back to school vibes, they're set in a college, they have quite darkish, ominous undertones. Then we've got just general autumnal vibes, so maybe the books are gothic or they're cozy, so two ends of the spectrum. And then finally we've got good old classic horror as spooky season is beginning. We'll start off with the books that are given just the more general autumnal vibes, and the first book I want to talk about is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a book that I would recommend diving into pretty blindly, so I'm not going to really give you too much of a synopsis or plot, but essentially the book follows Piranesi, who is such a wonderful, wholesome, just amazing character, and we're essentially following him as he lives in this world where there's this like labyrinth of halls, there's an ocean inside this house, and this house is the only world that he knows. You kind of go on this journey of discovery with him to figure out what's going on, because there's definitely something going on in the background that Piranesi is very naive to, and we essentially end up figuring out this puzzle with him. And what really gives the autumnal vibes with this book is the house that Piranesi lives in, his world, the gothicness of the architecture. And if you actually look up the Italian artist Giovanni Piranesi, you can see that Susanna Clarke got a lot of inspiration from this artist and the way that she brought to life his architecture, that really dark gothic, just beautiful descriptions in here. It gives all the autumn gothic feels and I absolutely loved it. I will not lie, the first 80 pages of this book were a slog. For me personally, they were a slog. But luckily I had already read reviews which warned me that, okay, just push past the first 80 pages, that the payoff will be worth it. And they were correct. The payoff was worth it. So please, 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 please do not get put off by how descriptive and monotonous and low-key boring, if I'm being honest, the first third of the book is. The world building in this is so atmospheric and dreamy and extremely emotive. Susanna Clarke, her writing will just capture you. It really is beautiful. This book overall, what Susanna Clarke captured was a really unique take on themes such as religion, philosophy, the pursuit of knowledge, identity, ambition. They were just all tackled in such a unique way, and there is no other book I've read anywhere like this one. And there is very, very, very light fantasy, magical realism in this, so that's another thing to just keep in mind if that interests you. So the next book I want to talk about, and this is a gothic classic, and that's The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So this book is set in Victorian England, and it essentially is a tale about hedonism, about decadence, about morality, or more specifically immorality in Dorian Gray's case. We're following Dorian Gray, and he becomes really obsessed with this very exquisite portrait of himself that a friend has painted of him. And upon making new friends with Lord Henry Wotton, Lord Henry Wotton really introduces Dorian to hedonism, to seeking pleasure at all costs, and that Dorian should take advantage of this as someone who is considered a very handsome, he's youthful, is wealthy, and is just very well regarded in polite society in Victorian England. And upon, learning all these things, Dorian becomes then really obsessed with this portrait of himself. He really, he gets a bit like, yeah, I'm the shit, basically. So then we follow Dorian as he begins to live this double life. On the one hand, he's presenting himself to English society as this true gentleman, but then on the other hand, behind closed doors, he is he is indulging his innermost desires, no matter how immoral they may be. And it's only his portrait, this portrait that he became obsessed with, that shows his true depravity of his sins. It reflects his true nature and the ugliness within him. It's interesting because there are definitely parallels between Dorian Gray and Oscar Wilde himself, because Oscar Wilde was a gay man, but it was illegal to be gay back in Victorian England, so he himself had to essentially live a double life so he could be true to himself and his identity, but he could only do that behind closed doors. He wasn't doing anything immoral like Dorian, but it's just interesting to see that there is that parallel between the author and the protagonist in this novel. It's extremely interesting that this, of course, is a very moralistic tale, but it's still so relevant in our society, which is extremely image conscious, and that's something Oscar Wilde captures and encapsulates amazingly in this book with Dorian Gray and also Lord Henry Wotton's characters, and just a lot of the characters in this novel is very image conscious. As long as you present yourself in a certain way, then people will believe that is who you are. They won't really dig too much deeper to understand your true core and true being and true nature. So I really found it interesting that even now in the 21st century, this is still a very relevant book that will resonate with a lot of people, and it is amazing. It would honestly have been like the perfect gothic classic for me, like a easy 5-star all-time favorite, except chapter 11. Anyone that's read this book will understand chapter 11 is just a very, what's the word, incessant description of all the different hobbies that Dorian Gray gets interested in, and it's literally just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph explaining each hobby, and it is so boring and unnecessary and does not add anything to the tale in my opinion. So honestly, they scrap chapter 11. This is just pure, almost perfection. So highly recommend for that gothic autumn vibe. The last book in this section of just general autumnal fall vibes is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. And instead of giving the same kind of gothic energy that the last two books were giving, this one is giving more of that cozy. This is referred to as comfort sci-fi, and it is honestly such a precious tale. Like, I genuinely did not think sci-fi could be written like this. So in this world that we're in, it's in the future, we're on the moon, and in centuries before, there were robots that were used for labour, whether it's in factories or just labour in different aspects. And one day, they all put down their tools, they've all gained self-consciousness, and they're like, deuces, we're out, we're done being your slaves, we're going to go live our best lives out in the wilderness, and off they all go. And then they essentially fade into myth and legend because humans don't see them again ever after that. And then now we're following this non-binary tea monk, and they're having a lot of questions about purpose and what is the point of life and what are they doing with their life, and they decide to pack up their things and go off and travel. They're still being a tea monk as they're traveling, and they're on their journey of self-discovery. And by tea monk, essentially their job, which I absolutely love and I think we should have here in our own society, is that they'll sit down, they have all their different teas, people will come with their problems depending on what they're going through. They will give them a specific tea that will help, they will allow them to sit down, talk to them about whatever their problems are, essentially just listen and be there. Okay, so camera died, of course, first time using it. Already issues, but back to the good old trusty iPhone camera. So let's continue. Where was I? Robots. Okay, let's talk about the tea monk's job. Okay, I remember where I was. So then we're following the tea monk as they are, as I said, just traveling around from town to town. And then finally they end up stumbling into the wilderness and they come across a robot. And the relationship that develops between the tea monk and the robot is just written so incredibly. Chambers, the writing is just, they grow to really enjoy the other's company and to really pick at the other's brain and understand their differences, their similarities, and they just go on this journey together of self-discovery, about identity, about one's purpose in the world, and if one even needs a purpose to be fulfilled or live a fulfilling life, and what is a fulfilling life, and what is identity. It's just such a thought-provoking, inclusive and comforting story. Literally the story feels like a very warm cup of tea, and it's just what you need on a gloomy autumn or fall day, and I could not recommend it anymore. Next we're gonna go to dark academia, and the first book I want to talk about is Bunny by Mona Awad. This book, where to begin? It feels like you're in a bizarre fever dream when you're reading this book. It feels like you are falling down a never-ending rabbit hole and you're ending up in a very dark and twisted wonderland. Very dark. It's giving Alice in Wonderland, but Tim Burton. The Tim Burton style one. It's very hard to even properly explain the plot of this book. The best way to describe it is that it's weird. And when you think it can't get any weirder, it gets even more weird. It's just basically a very fun descent into chaos and madness. But I'll try and give at least a little brief description of what's actually happening. So we're following Samantha, or Sam. She attends this very elite New England university and she's on this MFA program, very highly selective, this program. And Samantha, she's very much giving, I'm not like the other girls, you know, she's giving the, I'm more mysterious and I'm not into what other people are into and I'm just so like different. And I actually quite like with this book, it's almost making that whole like, I'm not like the other girls being different trope quite ironic. It's pretty an ironic take, I'll say, on it, and an extreme take as well. So Sam, she's part of this one sort of tutorial or seminar where there's this group of 4 girls and they're part of this group. They all call each other bunny, 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 and they're all very like girly and very cliquey, and Sam, she despises them. She can't stand them. She hates them. Her and her best friend Ava, they have no time for them. But she has this one class where it's just her and them. And then eventually they invite her to one of their out of class workshops that they do, which they call the Smut Salon. And you see as she gets drawn more and more into their world, and that's then when we go on this very chaotic roller coaster of a ride into absolute just I don't even know the word to use, just as I said, chaos and madness. And I was so here for it. Just very much suspend disbelief from the jump, from the beginning, and just go with the flow. I will say there's parts in the middle, I think it did drag a little bit, but then ooh, the way it all gets wrapped up in the end, you'll just be like, huh. There's no point in trying to predict anything that's going to happen in this book. It's one of those books which is a really good form of escapism, because you are just reading it like, I have no bloody idea where Mona Awad is going to take me next. You can't, you're just like, I actually have no idea where this is going, and that's part of the fun. It's good to go in pretty much not knowing anything more than that. And then the next book I want to talk about that also falls in the dark academia realm has to be The Secret History by Donna Tart. This is considered the godfather of dark academia. It's a cult classic, and I understand why. Donna Tart's writing is phenomenal, it's spectacular. This fictional college campus and group of misfit characters that she's created is scarily good. Like, you genuinely are transported to this college every time you open the pages. The characters, even though they're all extremely unlikable and odd, that's the only word I can use, very odd for their age, especially, and for like when you think of typical college students, they couldn't be any further from that. Again, it's another of that we're not like the other girlies energy. Because they're so odd, you genuinely are so intrigued to find out more about them, why they are the way they are, how their dynamics all work in this group. The book, essentially, we're following this misfit group of college students, and they're part of this like ancient Greek kind of classics class in their, is it New England as well? It's always a New England college, in their elite New England college. They're all extremely clever, pretty eccentric, and their professor is very charismatic and extremely eccentric and only allows usually 5 students every year to be a part of his class. You're not allowed to take any other class except for this like classics ancient Greek Latin class. Then we're following the protagonist, essentially is able to wrangle his way in to this class, become the 6th student, eventually become a part of this group. Is also becomes under the influence of this very charismatic eccentric professor, and the professor really encourages them to think beyond the realms of normal morality, of normal human existence as we know it. These students end up taking that to the next level, essentially. I don't want to give much more than that because the kind of mystery element is a big part of the book. You just see how all their lives are changed profoundly once a certain event occurs, and we see how the lead up to this event, we see it take place, we see the aftermath, and it's just done really well. I'm not gonna lie though, this did not need to be 600 pages. They could have taken out a good 250 pages from this book. This could have been like 300, 350 pages. We still would have got the amazing world building, but it definitely was dragged out at times. But because Donna Tart's writing is so captivating and amazing, I also wasn't mad at the length of it. It's just that for the actual plot and story, there are definitely about 200 too many pages in here. So now we're gonna go into the final section of this video, so that's horror. And the first book I want to talk about, I actually finished just a couple of weeks ago, and that's Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. Rumfitt expertly combines literary fiction with horror to produce this haunting political allegory for a fascist, racist, traumatized and transphobic Britain as we know it now. A scary reality to live in, and unfortunately our current reality. This book is a angry dissection of contemporary politics and increasingly hostile attitudes in 21st century Britain. And I found it really interesting how Rumfitt uses this haunted house to really illuminate how trauma, particularly unresolved trauma, how fear, confusion can birth bigotry, and it will really nurture and feed it. Also, just how the haunted house really shows how fascism will destroy people and all of those around them, and it's just such an incredibly unique way to explore fascism, to explore racism, transphobia, so many other isms, and just read it. It's punk, it's unflinching, it's gothic, it's radical, it's political, and it's just also just an interesting story in and of itself. Following these three girls who become friends during university. We've got Alice, who is a transgender woman. We have Isla, who is a cis queer woman, and we have Hannah, who is a straight cis woman. And Alice and Isla have this very intense friendship, which sometimes goes beyond platonic. And Hannah is just kind of the third wheel in the friendship. We go back in time and see as one day they all go to this haunted house together, but only two of them leave, and that's Alice and Isla. Hannah never leaves the house with them and is officially reported as a missing. And then we're mainly following the perspectives, and it goes between Alice and Isla, and we see how they're no longer friends ever since they left that haunted house. And interestingly, they both have very, very different perspectives of what happened that night, what happened to Hannah, what happened to each other. And it's from that night in that haunted house and their different perspectives that Rumfitt really, really is showing how trauma, how hurt can really birth bigotry and just hatred in a person. I just thought this was just such an incredible depiction of the modern day trans experience in Britain, of the thinking behind TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. I love that we're exploring both supernatural and real life and real world horrors in this book, and I am so excited to see what else Rumfitt's gonna come out with. If you really appreciate and love actual beautiful and really interesting writing, and that literary element is there in tenfold, but then also the horror elements are there. Next, I'll talk about a horror book that has become potentially an all-time favorite horror book, and that is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. And this book essentially follows a couple. They go up to this cabin in the woods for a romantic getaway to celebrate their engagement. However, things start happening whilst they're in this cabin. It does not end up being a romantic, relaxing getaway. In fact, sleep is the last thing they want during this vacation, as they're hearing all sorts of noises coming from the woods, screams, mournful cries, the sounds of children, dark looming figures. I don't want to say too much more than that, because kind of not knowing what's happening is part of the joy and experience of this book. The horror and the unnerving feeling that was seeping through each and every single page was just top tier. If you're someone who enjoys horror where it's more about the plot and just the general, just kind of scary, eerie feeling and vibe and atmosphere throughout, then this is for you. The character development study, yeah, a bit limited, but I don't need that for a good horror book or to be scared sufficiently. Also, there was this Native American folklore and also representation in the book, which at the time I really enjoyed that, having that lens and having that element weaved into the narrative, and it works well for the story. But unfortunately, in the author's epilogue, he was given quite like self-righteous white savior energy when discussing why he, as a white man, included the Native American representation in the way that he did, and that definitely tainted then the representation and the way it was weaved into the narrative, unfortunately. But the book itself, overall, it scared the living daylights out of me, and that's what I wanted, so I would highly recommend. But if you sleepwalk or sleep talk, or you have a partner who does, you may want to give this one a skip. You may not want to read this one. Finally, I get to talk about one of my faves, which I always jump at the chance to speak about on this channel, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And Stephen Graham Jones is actually a Native American author, so we get Native American representation here, which is phenomenal. In this book, we're following these four friends who they're part of the indigenous Blackfoot community in the US. And these four boys end up doing something they really should not have when they're living in their reservation in this Blackfoot community. And then we're following them 10 years in the future from this event that happened when they were boys, and now we're in the present as they're all adults, they're all living their different lives, whether they have families or, you know, they're just living, doing their own thing. And we see how nature comes to wreak havoc and gets revenge on each and every one of these individuals. The way Stephen Graham Jones uses this story to explore intergenerational trauma, talk about Native American ideologies and belief systems. He makes it so accessible for those of us who are non-Indigenous, and I really appreciated that. It was so interesting to find out more. And the way that dread, paranoia, claustrophobia was maintained in this book genuinely had me like sitting like tense the entire time. I genuinely felt stressed, like really stressed at times reading this book. I'd have to physically put it down and like breathe, like, oh my goodness, because it's just that tension and that eeriness and that just feeling of someone is just constantly behind you and is gonna get you is captured wonderfully in these pages. I do think this book would have been like perfect if it was a novella, because the first 100 pages, they were a slog. I wasn't sure if I was even going to finish it. They are slow, and it does take a second to get used to Stephen Graham Jones's writing style, but genuinely the payoff is more than worth it. And the setup, I can understand more why it was slow. I don't think it had to be as long as it was, that slowness. But once it picks up after that first third, oh my goodness. Slow where? It should even come with a warning for those with high blood pressure, because this will stress you out. I was in sheer distress probably 50% of the time whilst reading this. These are my autumn fall book recommendations. I really hope you enjoyed them. Let me know in the comments if you have your own autumn fall books that you love to gravitate to, or if you've read any of these and if you enjoyed or didn't enjoy them. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you want to join this small chaotic corner of the internet, subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!